Namaskar, this is Rick. Welcome to Dharma series episode 4, and today we will discuss about the Rathakaras, the Niṣādas and Varna-śaṅkaras. If you want a background context of this episode, please go through the other 3 episodes before where I have discussed in detail regarding the 4 caste distinctions in the Sanatan society. However, in this episode we will discuss about the other subcastes. Please carry a notebook with you so that you can note down the important points, and I apologize in advance for the mistakes I will make in pronunciations because translating Sanskrit into English and pronouncing them is a very difficult job. So please forgive me for my mistakes. Also, if you have any new insights, you can post it in the comments so that I become enriched through your knowledge. So let's start with episode 4 of the Dharma series. Status of Rathakaras and decline in Vedic hierarchy. So, who were Rathakaras? What were their status? And how did their status decline in the Vedic hierarchy? Vedic age status. Rathakaras or chariot makers held special status in the Vedic age due to the importance of chariots in warfare. So, from the name itself, you can understand that Rathakaras were chariot makers. And chariots were very important in the Vedic culture, especially due to warfare. So, Rathakaras as chariot makers always held a special status in the Vedic hierarchy. Tattariya Brahmana reference. Tattariya Brahmana allowed a Rathakara to consecrate sacred fire, a privilege usually reserved for the upper 3 castes. So, according to Tattariya Brahmana, Rathakaras were allowed to consecrate the sacred fire. However, before we have seen that these consecration of sacred fire was usually reserved for the upper caste people. So from the Tattariya Brahmana, we get an evidence that the Rathakaras were treated in higher position as the upper 3 castes. Jamini in PMS held that Rathakara, though not a higher caste member, could consecrate sacred fire. So Jamini also supports this thing by the Tattariya Brahmana, where it is said that even though Rathakara is not of the highest 3 castes, but still they could consecrate the sacred fire. Varna classification confusion. Manu and Mahabharata suggest only 4 castes, implying Rathakara must be a Shudra, if not among the top 3. So, according to Mahabharata and Manu Smriti, there are only 4 castes, and that implies to the fact that Rathakara must be a Shudra because Rathakaras are not mentioned in the top 3 castes. Kautilya termed Rathakara as Vaishya by profession, though without proper authority. So Kautilya termed the Rathakaras as Vaishya, that means the third important caste, and this was without any proper authority. So according to Kautilya, Rathakaras belong to the Vaishya caste by profession. Professor Kangle quotes that some regard Rathakara as Antarala, means intermediate, but technically a Vaishya due to his profession. So Rathakaras belong to the intermediate caste. This has been said by Professor Kangle, but technically he is a Vaishya because he had the profession of chariot making. So we get evidences that in some cases Rathakaras held higher positions, and in some cases Rathakaras were told to be Shudra, which is the lowermost caste. Now we will see what are the later interpretations about the Rathakaras and how did their position in the society decline. So later interpretations and social decline of the Rathakaras. Yajnavalkya's view. Yajnavalkya says that a Rathakara was born out of a Mahisha father and Karana mother. So a Rathakara's father was Mahisha and mother was a Karana. Now what does Mahisha and Karana mean? Mitakshara elaborates Mahisha means a person who is born out of a Kshatriya father and Vaishya mother. So Kshatriya father and Vaishya mother unites to give birth to a Mahisha. And Karana means Vaishya father plus Shudra mother. So Vaishya father and Shudra mother gives birth to a Karana. And Rathakara is born out of the union of a Mahisha and Karana. So it is a bit complicated, but we can understand the position of the Rathakaras in the society where they were a result of intermingling of different other castes. Shankha allows Rathakara to perform Vedic sacrifices and wear sacred thread, almost like a twice born. So Dijas are the twice born people, mainly the upper two classes of the Varna hierarchy, the Brahmanas and Kshatriyas, were given the status of Dvijas. However, according to the Shankha philosophy, Rathakara is also allowed to perform Vedic sacrifices and the sacrificial ritual relating to the wearing of sacred thread, making them a twice born class or Dvijati Bhat. Inscriptional evidence. Shalankya king Nandi Varman granted land to a Chatuvedin of the Rathakara caste. So from the inscription we get an evidence where a famous king of the Shalankyana dynasty who ruled from AD 265 to 275 granted a piece of land to a Rathakara member. So thus we can understand the importance of the Rathakaras in court culture. Vijnanaveshwara commentary. So Vijnanaveshwara under Kulotunga 1 listed professions for the Rathakaras. So what are the professions in which a Rathakara is supposed to be expert at? Architecture, coach or chariot building, Gopura construction and mandapas for sacrificial tools. So these are the areas of profession where a Rathakara was supposed to be engaged in, and that has been listed in Vijnanaveshwara under Kulotunga 1. An AD 1169 inscription shows Rathakaras included blacksmiths, goldsmiths, stonemasons, carpenters, etc. So later on we find that Rathakaras evolved into doing more laborious tasks like the blacksmiths, goldsmiths, stonemasons, and carpenters, which required pure labor policy. Despite being a Dijati Bhat, the Mitakshara notes Rathakaras were treated as Shudra Bhat by the 12th century. So even though they were considered to be a twice born class, still Mitakshara notes that Rathakaras were treated like a Shudra by the 12th century. So we come to know how the position of the Rathakaras declined with the evolution of time. From ritual inclusion to Varna-śaṅkara. Early ritual role. In the ancient days, Niṣādas were allowed to perform Vedic sacrifices. So what were the Niṣādas? In the ancient days, Niṣādas had to perform Vedic sacrifices. Their position allowed them to perform Vedic sacrifices in the Varna hierarchy. Jamini states Nishadas lie beyond the pale of three upper Varnas. So was the Nishadas were social classes who were beyond the upper three Varnas. They were outside the upper three Varnas. In PMS, it allows the Nishadas to perform Vedic sacrifices despite their ambiguous status. So, according to Jamini, Niṣādas are allowed to perform Vedic sacrifices, but their status in the society is not well described. Smriti literature presents conflicting views on the Nishada's ritual eligibility. So, Smritis do not always allow the Nishadas to perform sacrificial rituals or Vedic sacrifices. So, Smriti literature always presents a conflicting view on how the Nishadas did rituals, how they were allowed to do rituals. Nishadas were originally powerful forest tribes during the early Vedic period. So, during the early Vedic period, that is from 1500 to 1000 BC roughly, Nishadas were thought to be the forest tribes who resided solely on the forest and subsisted on the forest products. So, they were the people who lived in the forest during the early Vedic period. After conquest and subjugation, they were denied formal status and classified as Varna-śaṅkaras without recognized professions. So later on, their position in the society declined and they were removed from any kind of formal status, and they were classified as Varna-śaṅkaras, means they were results of union of mixed castes, and so they did not have any recognized professions. Now we will see about the Varna-śaṅkaras and mixed castes in theory. So who were the Varna-śaṅkaras? What were their role in the society? So Varna-śaṅkaras were mixed caste. Definition of Varna-śaṅkara. Varna-śaṅkara refers to a child of mixed parentage, probably not united by proper marriage. So here two parents will be of different castes, and thus they may not have been properly united by the sacred bond of marriage. So Varna-śaṅkara is a result of union of a male and a female who are of different castes and probably have not been united through proper rituals of marriage. Anuloma marriage. Now, there were two types of marriage. Anuloma marriage means higher caste husband and lower caste wife. This is very important. Anuloma means higher caste husband and lower caste wife. Whereas Pratiloma means higher caste wife and lower caste husband. So, in Anuloma, the husband is of higher caste. In Pratiloma, the wife is of higher caste. So, their children, since both the male and female are of different castes, so their children are stigmatized as Varna-śaṅkara. Manu stated each Varna can produce 15 Varna-śaṅkaras, totaling 64 when including the original 4 Varnas. So according to Manu Smriti, each Varna had the right, or each Varna could produce 15 Varna-śaṅkaras through union with different other castes. So there were a total of 60 Varna-śaṅkaras, and when you add 4 Varnas, Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas and Shudras along with the 60 Varna-śaṅkaras, then you get a total of 64 types of castes in the Hindu society. Though mathematically plausible, even scholars like Mathatithi couldn't name all 60 plus mixed castes. So this has been mathematically plausible to identify the 64 types of castes, but even great scholars like Mathatithi couldn't name all the 60 plus castes. So we do not find the names of 60 plus castes anywhere in the ancient texts. Kane lists 60 castes in the Vedic list and 125 in the post-Vedic list from 500 BC to 1000 AD. So Kane is a famous scholar who did a lot of research in the caste system of India. And according to Kane, there are 60 castes in the Vedic list and 125 in the post-Vedic list from 500 BC to 1000 AD. So Kane lists all the 60 castes which had been said by Manu. However, he has told that later on, during 500 BC to 1000 AD, in these roughly 1500 years, there evolved 125 other castes, and he has also named all of them in a list. Dharma Shastra sources. These lists were based on professions, not parentage, and reflect evolution into occupational caste. So, according to Smriti and Dharma Shastra, all these lists were based on professions. They were not based on hereditary parentage, and thus we reflect into the evolution of occupational castes. Origins and professions of the mixed caste. How did they originate and what were their professions? So, type of lists. The Vedic list is silent on caste origins. Post Vedic list give parentage and prescribes professions by caste. So, the Vedic list is not telling anything about the caste origins. However, the post Vedic list mainly attributes the professions based on caste. So we come to know that caste based professions came during the post Vedic times. Parentage and contradictions. Some same castes could have different origins in text. Example, a caste from a Brahmana plus Shudra or Kshatriya plus Shudra. So, same caste could have different origins according to text. So, according to the text of the post Vedic period, there has been flexibility in the marriage system as we can understand from the mixed castes. Vishaj, a physician mentioned in Rig Veda, condemned in Yajurveda Samhitas for being too close to death and impurity. So, Vishaj and medical caste. This is a type of caste which has been mentioned in Rig Veda. It mainly refers to a physician. However, according to Yajurveda Samhitas, Vishaj is not held in a high status. They are condemned for being too close to death and impurity. Ushanas and mixed origins. Vishaj is said to originate from Brahmana plus Kshatriya or Brahmana plus Vaishya. According to Ushana, Vishaj is the result of union between a Brahmana and Vaishya. However, in other texts it has been noted that Brahmana and Kshatriya unites to give birth to a Vishaj who is involved in the profession of being a physician. Manu and Bodhayana, Yajnavalkyana and Ushanas attribute Ambasthas to Brahmanas plus Vaishya marriage. So Ambasthas were the result of Brahmana being united with a Vaishya, and that has been mentioned in Manu, Bodhayana and Yajnavalkya. So from different sources we get different types of mixed castes. Low status of medical work. Medicine was treated as impure. Unfortunately, medicine was not seen to be a very pure thing in ancient India. Hence, caste origins were fabricated to exclude Brahmanas from such professions. So, medicines were said to be impure things, and as a result, the caste system was fabricated in such a way that Brahmanas do not get involved in the profession of being a physician or should not deal with medicines. Decline of Niṣādas and role in Hindu society. So, how did the position of the Niṣādas decline and what was their role in the Hindu society? Niṣādas and Vedic sacrifices. Niṣādas were once allowed to perform Vedic sacrifices, as has been noted by Yaksha, Manusmriti, and Yajnavalkya. So, according to these three texts, Niṣādas were allowed to perform Vedic sacrifices. Parasava and Manu's view. So Manu defines Parasava related to corpse or Shava born from Nishada origins. So people who deal with corpse or Shava. Corpse is termed as Shava in Sanskrit. So these people are of Nishada origins, means they belong to the mixed classes of Varna hierarchy. So Gautama distinguishes between Nishada and Parasava based on legitimacy and parentage. So according to Gautama, there is difference between Nishada and Parasava, and this difference is based on legitimacy and parentage. Text used Brahmana or Kshatriya father plus Vaishya or Shudra mother to strip Nishadas of rights. So, what is the justification for the exclusion of Nishadas from the Vedic society? The justification is that a Brahmana or Kshatriya father is uniting with a Vaishya or Shudra mother, and because of that union, the Nishada's rights should be stripped off because it is an union between a higher and a lower caste. Mahabharata mentions tribes like Yavanas, Kiratas, Shakas, some from Brahmana Kshatriya unions, others as Shudras or Vaishyas. So Mahabharata mentions different kinds of tribes, and those main tribes are Yavanas, Kiratas, and Shakas. And all these tribes are results of union between Brahmana and Kshatriyas, or sometimes unions between Shudras or Vaishyas. So we get to know that mixed classes of people originated because of union of higher and lower castes. Dasayus instructed to maintain dharma and perform rites, indicating cultural assimilation attempts. So Dasayus, who were the lowermost servants of the ancient society, Dasayus were instructed to maintain dharma and perform rites. They also received received rules which they were supposed to maintain. And what were those rules? They were supposed to maintain dharma and perform rites, indicating that there was an attempt to culturally assimilate these mixed classes or nishadas into the early Hindu society. Tribal degradation and social absorption. So how did the position of them declined or degrade in the society, and what attempts were made to absorb them into the hierarchical fold? So Mahabharata explanation: Shakas, Yavanas, Kambojas, once Kshatriyas, became Shudras due to loss of contact with Brahmanas. So Shakas, Yavanas, and Kambojas were once Kshatriyas, but they, for some unknown reason, cut off all kind of contact with the Brahmanas, and thus they became Shudras. So having contact with the Brahmana is a significant thing which the Kshatriyas are supposed to do according to Mahabharata. Manu supports this, citing assimilation and identity loss as causes for status reduction. So, according to Manu, this is supportable, means if you don't stay in touch with the Brahmanas, then your status will be reduced. And this law has been obviously made by the Brahmanas themselves, as you can understand, because they the Brahmanas put themselves in such an important position that if you don't keep contact with them, your social status will reduce. So, thus, assimilation was very important for your stay as a social class of people. Kane states caste origins in Smṛtis are not always real but reflect actual shifts in livelihood and status. So, according to Kane, the Smṛtis are not always real. Whatever caste origins have been described in the Smṛtis, they are not always real, but they are important to understand the shifts in livelihood and status, how the position of different castes shifted throughout history. Real occupations led to real castes. Some stories of mixed origin are fictional justification. So, in reality, in historical reality, real occupations are the ones which led to differentiation between real castes. However, some stories of mixed origins are just works of fiction in order to justify the mixed classes of people. Though textual origin stories may be fictional, actual caste guilds and professions did exist. So all these textual origin stories may be fictional because they are mythological stories, but still it can be no way ignored that caste guilds, which means union among different castes and professions, obviously existed. So different kinds of unions or committees were formed who were termed as caste-based guilds. Writers often knew little about real caste complexities. Kane stresses census data as more reliable. So, according to Kane, Brahmana writers had fictitious genealogies, means they knew very little about caste complexities. They just wrote from imagination. And so Kane stresses that you must have census data in order to understand the origin and tribal degradation of castes and how they were absorbed into the social hierarchy. Social functions and origins of subcastes. So, what were the social functions and what were the origins of these subcastes? So, three origins of subcastes. Admission of non-Hindu tribes. When non-Hindu tribes came to the Varna hierarchy, subcastes were formed. Then splitting of castes into richer, poorer groups. So, when a single caste split into two divisions, that is one rich division and one poor division, then there was origin of a subcaste. Monopoly over new crafts by specific groups. Sometimes few specific groups had monopoly over new types of craftsmanship, and thus that led to creation of subcastes. So these are three theories regarding how different subcastes originated in ancient society. The first is when non-Hindu tribes assimilated into Hinduism. The second is when a single caste divided into richer and poorer groups. The second is that when a specific group of people monopolized certain craftsmanship activity. Admission into professional castes were limited to male children of craftsmen. So admission into professional castes happened through the male children of the craftsmen, and that gives the biggest evidence of patriarchy in the society. So all the castes depended on the male children of the craftsmen. Crafts professions were monopolized by caste guilds or Shreni Dharma upheld by kings and law. So these craft professions, which were monopolized by caste guilds, had to be authorized by the kings and according to the law of the state. Then only a subcaste based on profession can originate. State supported caste enforcement. So kings upheld Chaturvarnya Dharma, barring Shudras and non-Shudras from crossing into each other's roles. So what was the duty of the king? The duty of the king was to uphold Chaturvarna Dharma, means the system where the Hindu society was divided into four castes. It was the duty of the king to see that the Shudras and non-Shudras did not interfere into each other's roles. So they should not cross their professional boundaries. And whose duty was it to see to that? It was the duty of the king. The caste system included gradations even among untouchables, always someone lower to suppress. So the caste system had different grades among untouchables, and that led to someone lower in order to suppress. So that was a safety valve theory, means pressure should be released slowly rather than all at once. Economic utility. Though oppressive, Caste preserved stability and aided ancient economic organization and division of labor. So caste system may sound oppressive, and yes, it was oppressive in certain contexts, but it can be no way ignored that economic organization and division of labor was correctly possible in the society because of caste system. Conclusion: Caste evolution, Varna-śaṅkara, and decline. Now we will go through a summary of entire presentation. Since I have discussed all of these in detail in the last few minutes, therefore I am just going to read it out. Decline of Rathakaras and Niṣādas. Rathakaras, once Vedic elite chariot makers, and Niṣādas, who performed sacrifices, were gradually demoted due to changing ritual norms and caste rigidity. Conflicting scriptural interpretations. Texts like PMS, Mahābhārata, Manusmriti, and Mritakshara offered conflicting views on caste eligibility, allowing early flexibility but later enforcing exclusivity. Rise of Varna-śaṅkaras, mixed caste offspring. Varna-śaṅkaras like Ambastha, Vishaj, and Parasava were stigmatized, especially those in impure professions such as medicine or manual work. Role of parentage and profession. Caste began to be defined by both parentage and profession. The shift from ritual to occupational hierarchy marginalized many tribal and artisan groups. Tribal assimilation and downgrading. Tribes like Shakas, Yavanas, and Kiratas were initially accepted but later degraded as Shudras when their political military relevance declined. Caste monopolies over professions supported by kings and guild laws, Shreni Dharma, restricted social mobility and maintained hereditary status. Caste as historical and constructed. Scholars like Kane affirm that caste origins in Smriti literature were partly fictitious, reflecting socio-economic realities more than true genealogy. So that was all about the VarnaSankaras, Rathakaras, and the Niṣādas. Niṣādas and VarnaSankaras were almost synonymous with each other, and Rathakaras were the chariot makers who held high position in early days. So hope this video was useful to you, and please follow me so that I can bring exciting contents in future. Also, if you have something to add to all these informations, then please post it in comments. Thank you so much for your love and support.